Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to my second Vilnius Academy module. This one is on creativity and ideation. The idea for this module came from the Dublin-Belfast International Session in 2016 when Maria Pasci gave a presentation on this. So first and foremost, I need to thank Pasci for having given this presentation and credit her with these slides and with the concept and the idea of bringing it into EYP. What I want to present is a technique which was conceived by a man called James Wood Young about how we come up with ideas. It's a fairly simple idea, but I think it's one which accurately describes the ideation process, and if you've ever come up with great ideas, you might see the linkages here, or if you've ever been around very creative people, you might also recognize some of the things that this presentation will mention. So I just want to go through that technique, explain how it works a little bit, and then think about it in an EYP context. So this should be a relatively short presentation and just something to get you thinking about how you can be creative and how your delegates can be creative at the Vilnius IS. So there's two basic principles to this theory, and it's basically that there is no idea which is completely new or which comes from completely out of the blue. An idea is basically nothing more than a combination of old elements. Now, the capacity to bring seemingly disjointed and seemingly unrelated old elements into new combinations and therefore create a new idea largely depends on the ability to see relationships. So the thinking here is that creative people are good at seeing relationships between elements that people had previously thought weren't related. And what creative people can do is they can bring those two elements together, and then out of that springs a new idea. And so consequently, nothing is original. There's no completely original idea. You're largely building on something that's already there, but just seeing a new relationship between two existing things and putting them together in new and creative and slightly different ways. And in a way, you can think about this, a lot of EYP games, for example, that we do, when we see new and innovative games, they're often adaptations of previous games. So, for example, at Vilnius, you might want to do a historically themed game because of the session theme. And one way of doing that might be to take Abigail and to give them historical characters, for example. Bang! You've got the theme idea, you've got an existing game, you've put them together in a new way, and you've got a new idea. And you can get more original and more creative for those of you who are familiar with writing theses or having to come up with new academic concepts. I mean, you'll notice that a lot of the best academics often take an existing idea in the literature, apply a framework or a theory or a concept from some other area to it, and they get a new idea. I mean, Paul Krugman won his Nobel Prize for economics through putting geography with economics and conceiving of economic geography. And they're two existing things, but he's seeing a new relationship between them and getting some very, very new material out of them. So this shows you the steps that we go through when we're coming up with an idea, or when we're trying to put two existing elements together in a new relationship. And you start off with gathering raw material, and then you digest all of this material. So there's a process of sort of getting your knowledge together and then processing that knowledge, and then quite radically you forget about it. You put it out of your mind, you put it into your unconscious mind, and you sit on it, you sleep on it, you go away and you interact with things unrelated to the area that you're trying to come up with a new idea in. So you might be trying to come up with a new system for committee work, and then you go to the opera, or you go and watch a movie. You do something quite different, something else that you engage with. And after that process, often a new idea can be born because you're seeing new relationships, you're exposing yourself to alternative elements and relationships. And then the idea is born. And then once the idea is born, it's like a rough diamond, and you need to shine it and polish it so that it can actually fit into the real world. The idea that we come up with is going to have to be adapted somewhat so that it's practical in the new world, and that's the final step in this process. The next couple of slides are going to go through all of this in a bit more detail. So the gathering material stage, there's sort of two types of material that you might gather. One is specific material, and this relates to the product and the people who you target. You're coming up with a new game in EYP. The specific material you're going to gather will be, you'll go to your EYP notebook and look at games you've used in the past. You might talk to other chairs and find out about games that they've done. You'll look at the EYP game booklet, and you'll see the full range of games that are out there. So you'll gather that type of specific material. Then you'll also gather general materials, but there's no timeline for gathering general materials. That's a continuous process of being interested in an array of subjects. And I wonder, is there a link between people who are cultured and have very engaged lifestyles where they think about and they do a lot of different things and they're engaged in a lot of different things? I wonder, and I don't know what the answer to this is, I wonder, are they more creative people because they have a great store of general materials and they can link that with their specific materials when they're coming up with new ideas. So I'm thinking here, you might be thinking of a new problem-solving game that involves various different characters. Maybe the general materials you might draw from might be A Night at the Opera, or watching a crime thriller movie, and you draw ideas from that for a new game, and suddenly you've got something that seems quite original, but you're just drawing on specific materials and general materials that you may have already been familiar with. So ultimately an idea comes about from a combination of specific knowledge about products and people. They come together with this general knowledge about life and events. These two kaleidoscopes emphasize this idea. Ultimately, there's only two things on the slides here, but there's a huge number of different possible combinations. You get those combinations by moving the kaleidoscopes around, and when they are in different positions, they have a different relationship with each other, and ultimately it's those relationships which are the fount of new ideas. So that's just re-emphasizing the point that's already been made here. So after the gathering process, you then move into the mental digestive process. So what you're doing here is you bring two facts together to see how they fit. And so what you're seeking now is this new relationship. It's a new sort of synthesis where everything will come together in this new neat combination. So you've gathered all your material. You're going through this constant general material process. You've got your specific material. And once you have the information, you're thinking about those relationships, you're thinking about how they might fit together. That's how you're sort of digesting the information that you have and thinking about the possibilities for how they fit. I think this step is quite interesting. This is when you drop the problem completely. So you stop going through that mental digestive process. You've already digested the different information that you have, and now you're turning the problem over to your unconscious mind. And you just let it sit there while you sleep, or while you do something else, or while you go and live your life, or you go away from that a little bit. You drop the problem and you turn to whatever stimulates your emotions. So that can be your hobbies, your interests, friends, relationships, whatever. You just turn to something else. But all of the information that you've gathered and all of the relationships you've been thinking about, they're festering, they're there, they've lodged themselves in your unconscious mind, and they'll pop up and you'll turn them over. So it's there, you've registered it, but you're not actively engaging with it. And then after this process, there is the birth of an idea. When do ideas come about? They come about when you've stopped straining for them and you've passed from a period of rest and relaxation from the search. So your idea, it's very difficult to reach out for an idea or to just try and create an idea or to force an idea. This isn't a process that you can really force. It's something that you need to gather the material, think about the relationships, sit on it for a while, and then after you've come through that period of rest and relaxation from the search, the idea will come to you. But it's not about reaching for the idea, it's not about trying to create the idea, it's about giving the idea the space and the time to come to you naturally, which is a slightly different way of thinking about achieving things or making things happen than I think most people have, but it's very organic. And then the final stage is when your new idea meets the real world. So this is kind of the morning after stage, and it's here where you have to shape your idea a little bit, work it over, change it to fit the environment, make sure that it's actually practicable. So you might have this great new game that you've come up with where you're combining two elements that have never been put together before, and it's really going to work, but you now need to refine it, and you need to think, can I do this in team building? Will I have the materials? Will I have the resources? Will my delegates understand it? Will they be able to engage it? Is it too long? Is it too short? Have I got enough information in it? All of these practicalities have to be dealt with to make sure that the idea is actually feasible when it then goes out into the real world. And that's the full process. That's the whole of that chain that I presented at the start. Now, an interesting thing to think about is, how is this useful in an EYP context? For us, I think it's useful when we're thinking about sessions beforehand. So if you're presiding sessions in the future, the different things you want to do at the session, the vision you want to have, the way you want to run your team. If you're chairing at sessions in the future, the different things you want to do with your committee, how you're going to structure committee work, how you're going to structure team building, all of those things are relevant there. And you can see how we would take the time, process things, gather material. All of that could be quite effective, and it's something you can do in the next 2 weeks before Vilnius as well. What I think is a more interesting question is, how can we allow our delegates to go through this process? Because we expect delegates to be creative at the session, and they've done their pre-session work where they're thinking about the topic, they're thinking about the issue, they may have started thinking about some solutions, but we don't really expect or even want them to come to the session with a set of ideas for what they think, or a set of conclusions. We do want ideas, but we don't want them to have firm conclusions about what should be in the resolution, and they're not open to compromising, changing, or thinking about new ideas, because ultimately that's the discussion that we go through at committee work. So we do want delegates to be creative at the session, yet going through this ideation process at the session might be quite challenging. Yet it's also, and maybe this is reflected in your own EYP experience, the way that we structure sessions does give delegates downtime, it gives them time outside of committee work, it gives them time to interact with completely different elements where you wouldn't think that there is naturally a link with the resolution, but it gives them an opportunity to gather that general knowledge and to digest the information and to drop the information completely and to take a break from it. So they might be talking on Monday evening of committee work, and then on Monday night they are doing a social activity. They're not thinking about their committee work necessarily, but if they've digested the information, if they've gathered the information, then that Monday evening is the time that they can take out to just drop the idea, and they come back on Tuesday morning, and that's when the idea might spring to them, or it might spring to them on Monday night, or it might spring to them on Tuesday night. So I wonder, is there something to be said for thinking about those 5 different steps and just seeing, as chairs, how can we facilitate that for our delegates? Is there something to be said for giving delegates the time at the end of the day to mull over and to digest the information that they've gathered during the day before they then go out into the evening event, so that it's there, it registers, and the unconscious mind can deal with it then when they're outside of the committee? Is it a good idea for us to give delegates time when they think about new ideas? I mean, if you don't create new ideas, if they come to you, then maybe we need to think about the utility of spending time like that. And as I said, I don't know what your experiences in EYP have been, but when I was a delegate, I often had good ideas outside of committee work at random moments when something would come to you. And that's maybe something to encourage with your delegates. But I think in conclusion on this module, it's an interesting concept, it's an interesting theory, and it's useful, I think, for us to use as officials when we're thinking about the interesting and different and innovative things that we want to do at the session, and that's something that a lot of you have spoken about really wanting to do. But also interesting when we think about what do we want to achieve by the end of each day at committee work, what do we want to do, how do we want to structure our day so that we can allow delegates to go through this creative thinking process as well during the Monday and the Tuesday and into the Wednesday of committee work. That's maybe also something to consider when you think about structuring committee work and when you think about what you want to achieve each day. But very happy to discuss any thoughts on this, or if you think it can be extended more broadly. And this is just one idea of ideation. There's other theories out there as well, but this is one that really strikes with me, so hopefully you have found this interesting. Pop me any questions if you have anything, and as I say, very happy to discuss at the session if you're interested. Thanks.